Last week at this time, we were anxiously awaiting the Boston Globe to publish an expose detailing allegations of sexual misconduct within its own newsroom. Earlier that day, WEEI's Kirk and Callahan referenced one reporter who had been let go, but when the Globe's story was published, the names were missing. The Boston Globe headline reads, "Media, including Globe, walk line in age of #MeToo." But scanning the fine print, details were vague. The paper referenced several employees who were let go over charges of sexual harassment, but no names were attached. In a memo to Globe staffers, editor Brian McGrory wrote, "We understand by withholding the identity of the reporter involved, we'll be accused of a double standard." Many people, including WGBH's Jim Browdy, thought the Globe should have printed the names of those accused.
I am one of those people. Why didn't you disclose the name of the contract worker, the reporter, the sales guy who are no longer with the Globe?
The bottom line is the transgressions that Mark uncovered in this story are not the kind of transgressions we would generally cover at another private company.
But the Globe has been reporting on a wide range of sexual misconduct, naming names of people like this little-known music professor. WEEI's Kirk and Callahan, who have their own grievances with the Globe, named the reporter this week.
That man's name is Jim O'Sullivan. He was a political reporter there for a while.
WGBH has independently confirmed Jim O'Sullivan is one of the people let go at the Globe.
I am Jim O'Sullivan with the Boston Globe.
The Globe's decision to withhold his name got Marjorie Egan wondering why the Globe named names of priests, but not their own employees, when they could be a danger to other women.
When we did that, we knew without any doubt we had irrevocable proof.
Seems to us if you let someone go or ask for a resignation, that's pretty irrevocable. Yeah, when you really look at some of the details in that story, some of the things that happened and some of the things that our reporting uncovered, by the way, with the help of Tori Bedford on WGBH staff, were really pretty awful and pretty rancid. And then to say that it didn't rise to the level when some of these accusations, even what they reported today about ESPN, the anchor involved, wrote some, not benign, they weren't terrific, they were inappropriate messages to like dream girl hashtag and that kind of stuff, but they printed all of that stuff. He's more well known because he's an anchor, but this music professor, he didn't rise to that level. No one has heard of him, and they said, well, he's well known in his circles. Well, Jim O'Sullivan is well known in our circles. Everybody in the news media knew him, so I am among those who believes it's a double standard.
Yeah, and when we were talking about this last week, we were waiting for the story to come, and I think we just assumed that the names were going to be in there. So I, for one, was pretty surprised when the names weren't in there. I think that McGrory is in a difficult position. In fact, the people at issue here, including O'Sullivan, are not as well known as some of the people at other institutions. But given the good, aggressive reporting the Globe is doing on other institutions, there's just no way they could not name the people in their own shop. And I think that it came from a good motivation, but it was a big mistake.
Dan, I think you're giving Brian McGrory a little bit too much credit here. I think he's being really disingenuous in the way that he's describing the Globe's standard for reporting this. We all know that the Globe did not meet that standard in its reporting for this story. And if you go through the story, you can see all the places where it failed to meet that standard. The consequences for that, we now know Jim O'Sullivan's name, but before we did know that name, there was speculation about it being a different reporter, so it reflected badly on other reporters at the Globe. And if you think about the standard for a Me Too story in the media right now, the thing that happens after that story comes out is because we know the name, then we can hear corroborating stories from people who have cover to come out and tell their stories. This story had the opposite effect up until the point where we learned Jim O'Sullivan's name. People were less likely to come out because they didn't know exactly who they were talking about. People in the Globe newsroom didn't know it. And I think it's just unconscionable that they would not release that name. And I think there are bigger problems with this story that we're going to be hearing about for weeks to come.
I actually am going to defend the Globe here. I do think that a company has a right not to be fully transparent when it comes to the privacy of the accusers and the accused. We don't know what the circumstances were in terms of letting the person go, what promises were made. We don't know. We don't know the facts. And I think a company has a right to keep that quiet. And as Brian McGrory said, there's a difference between letting somebody go because you think that person does not uphold the high standards of integrity of your organization and believing that that person has committed an unlawful act of sexual harassment. So I do think there could be a difference. I also personally think the standards are a little too low. I think the Globe goes after organizations and people sometimes too quickly. And, you know, I think we're sort of entering the reign of terror phase of the sexual revolution, where people are very quick to condemn. And in many cases it's valid, but in some cases it's not. I also think, I'm sure we'll talk about this a little bit later when we talk about the Herald, you know, this would be an interesting role for the Herald, or, you know, in a town where there are two competing newspapers, isn't it the job of one to be the watchdog of the other? I mean, I don't personally expect institutions to police themselves that well. Most of them don't. And why isn't the Herald on this? Yeah. That's what I would ask.
I would say then don't come out and say that you did an exemplary job of reporting. And
I agree.
You said that you had a higher standard for this reporting than you would for other news organizations. That's just not true.
I agree with that.
Well, I would say that I would agree with you if it weren't the Globe and this wasn't the industry. We're in the business of reporting stories. That's our business. So, I don't know, I can't even think of another company. And if that company's policy, I would not agree with it. Please understand. But that's what they always did. So now they're following their policy, and we can argue with it, and we can file lawsuits, and we can do all that to get the information. But this is a company reporting on this. How do you then say, we're not going to tell you what's happening in our newsroom? And I just want to point out that the opposite was true. All of those women who were silenced, and nobody would believe them or, you know, say, okay, let's listen to you seriously. And here we have a situation where that has changed, and yet they're still being not held up or giving the space that they need to have to tell their stories.
I actually have to say, what I found most troubling about the article, honestly, was the way the reporter carelessly lumped in serious allegations with allegations that women felt that men in the newsroom mansplained and spoke over them in meetings.
Well, that's you know, I was also offended by Brian McGrory's note that, you know, that he wasn't going to slake the thirst of people like us. You know, I have to say, I had tremendous respect for Jim O'Sullivan. I like him. I still to this day. I feel terrible about this. I wasn't trying to slake a thirst by reporting his name. He happens to be the name attached with this, but we take no pleasure in that, and I want to make certain that everybody knows that.
Absolutely. And, you know, Carly and I may disagree on the quality of that story that was published. We're in total agreement that the name should have been in there.
Yeah.